Imagine that kind of situation being what led to the 80s uprise, where people were actually organizing themselves at the level of their street.
Yes.
And they were looking after each other and looking out for each other, and then deciding if we're going to overthrow apartheid, we're going to have to do it together.
Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Conversation Capital. As always, say voice of
the voice of
I'm
reason.
tired of saying it.
The voice of reason behind the mic. It's weird calling yourself things.
Yes. Voice of reason behind the microphone. We've got Ubonga Gweta and then myself, Ursula Makani, the host of TCC. As always, if you're new to the channel, you just clicked, somebody sent you the link. Start by subscribing and notification bell and
Switch it on,
yeah, definitely make sure that you do that. And welcome to the family. Today we are building up to next year's elections.
Yes.
And you know, definitely I'm somebody who's not the most clued up, and I just know that like you need to vote.
Yes.
But you know, the details around why do we vote, how does, you know, voting work in our country, what's important about it, this and that. And we said, you know, let's build up to the conversation, let's be part of the solution, you know, oriented people. And so we decided, let's bring Tessa Dooms in. Hi Tessa, how are you doing? I don't believe I said hi.
Hi, welcome to my channel.
Yes.
I've always wanted to say that. So, now I get to say it.
You got your chance, girl. Thank you so much for coming through, and thank you so much for joining us. And maybe let's just start with, who is Tessa Dooms? What is it that you do? And yeah, let's start there.
So, firstly, I'm a girl from Elders, which is a really important part of who I am.
Shout out Elders.
But I work in democracy and governance. I've been a lifelong kind of youth activist in the main, but in different ways. So I've been in academia, I've worked in civil society, and kind of worked in different spaces. But I've most recently landed in a space called the Rivonia Circle. So about a year and a half ago, a group of friends, colleagues, acquaintances came together, and we decided that we needed to start something that helps South Africans have a place of convening and convergence around the question of how we fix our politics. Sure. So we have a lot of issues that are economic in nature, and I think we all agree there's economic crisis. We all know there are social challenges in the country, and we all agree that those are bad. But we realize that there's a political crisis as well, that our politics is broken. And so we want to be create a place where we can try and fix that together.
Sure. I'm so curious as to in what context you guys meet once a month, or how does that work? How does that work?
Yeah. So when we started, or before we started, it was still during COVID, 2021 when we started the conversation. So we were meeting once a week on Zoom, just trying to ideate. Then we moved to one of our colleagues had like a Twitter space that he started doing. So we moved into that. And we actually announced that the Rivonia Circle was going to start functioning as an organization and all of that on a Twitter space. Yes. We just did like 2 videos. Songs and myself did a video each, just explaining the concept of what we wanted to do. And we were thinking we were going to explain this concept, and then, you know, we're going to build up this organization. And we thought in March, that was in January, in March we'll like launch.
Yes.
And then by the following day, we had so much interest that we were like, oh, maybe people think we're like a serious organization, and maybe we should be. So by the following week, that's kind of how I became the director of programs. We invented a program called the Democracy Builder. We went to Venda, to Toyando.
Yes.
And under a mango tree, we hosted our first workshop. So we do workshops across the country in different communities and spaces, giving communities an opportunity to talk about democracy together, you know, with each other, to think about what it is that they want, what they want to solve for. We help those communities also create their own projects, because democracy should be us governing ourselves. So those projects are about, what do you want to solve for? And let's solve for it together now, in real time. And we've seen people do the most amazing projects over the last year. We've done about 70 democracy builders across the country since we started.
Yes.
And we've seen people start chicken farms. We've seen people do library projects or reading projects that became library projects. We've seen people, actually in Naturina, most recently, a community that didn't have a clinic. They had land allocated to them 27 years ago for a clinic, and the clinic was never built. In 5 weeks, they got a mobile clinic delivered to their community, just by making a plan during a democracy builder. So ours is to really get people energized about the fact that we must self-govern. We
Yes.
can't just wait for politicians to save us because they're not going to.
Oh my gosh.
It's been a busy year.
Yes.
been a
But
heck
I'm
of a
actually,
busy
that
year.
was more than I expected, you know, because
Yes.
we often have people that talk and you say, what's the solution?
Yes.
How do we fix it?
Crickets.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, and it's always like, maybe we should start a party. You know, I'm always making those jokes. Like,
Yes.
somebody must start a party. Something
Yes.
needs to happen. And so to see somebody who says, not necessarily, we just, grassroots, we're going to start again and, you know, teach people how to manage the system that's been, the governing system that's been given to them and how to work around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why I thought this conversation is important is because in as much as we think people are apathetic, but there's also people who want avenues, right? So what are these avenues that some of them you teach in these democracy builders? Of course, we hope you mobilize, go to more communities, but just to give us a snippet into some of the things because what I'm getting is to say, you're saying to people, these resources are there, these channels are there, but we want you to go get them.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think one of the first important things we learned at the Rivonia Circle was that we're not going to teach anyone anything. That was the first thing we did. So, I mean, the programs is one aspect of what we do. So Democracy Builder is one aspect. Another aspect that we do is something called political theater. So where we mobilize around young artists and emerging artists. And that's the only learning platform is actually that one, because we get people in who are professional artists in their different performing arts to come and teach them artistic skills. But they then get to talk about their politics and their democracy on their own terms. The same is true for the Democracy Builder. It's a 6-hour workshop, but we don't come there to teach people. We come there to create spaces for safe conversation and to facilitate generative, productive conversations around democracy. Because most of our politics is about politicians speaking to us. We don't actually, number one, get to speak back often, but we also don't get to speak to each other about our democratic process and about our politics. And it's actually become taboo for people to talk about their voting and who they vote for. It's the weirdest thing. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk
Isn't it
about
things
democracy.
like my vote is my secret?
Yeah, so your vote is a secret, but the thing with the secret, you can decide whether you share a secret or not. It's not against the law to
Yes.
tell somebody
Yes.
what your
Or to
vote
engage
is,
in the
right?
conversation, yeah.
And I don't even have to land up with what is your vote, but can we talk about why we're voting or how we're voting or what our motivations are, what we are frustrated about on our own terms. Politics is about everyday experiences. So if you think about something that we teach, probably that's the only thing that is the ethos of our work, is that the political is personal.
Yes.
The political isn't about what happens at the union buildings or in parliament. If you don't have water coming out of your tap, there was a political decision that was made that caused you to not have water in your tap. So the political is deeply, deeply, deeply personal.
Yes.
And if you don't have the power to change that, if there's no water in your tap and you have no power to do anything about that, that's a deeply political thing. So we try and encourage people to think about the political as personal. And one of the mottos we have at the organization is that for us, we define politics as the power to act. And that everybody has some kind of power to act and change things, right? So I don't have babies. That's not something we're going to do here. But anybody who's ever lived with a baby knows that the moment the baby is born, the baby is the most powerful person in the house.
Sure.
Right? A small...
Well, your true came from a personal place because she's a new mom.
The baby's just powerful, right? And the baby doesn't know the baby's powerful. The baby's not trying to throw its weight around. The baby's just being a baby. But the baby has power, and the baby can shape how the finances of the family work, when you're going to sleep, where you're going to go, how you're going to do all of that. We're the baby of the democracy as the citizens. We have lots and lots and lots of power that we don't realize and we don't think about.
Yes.
And we actually should be able to shake everything. There are 400 parliamentarians. In total, maybe in the country, there are like maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people who are in legislations, wards, all of that as politicians.
Yes.
There are 60 million of us. Really, we are actually the more powerful people.
Yes. Yes.
And so we must start to think about how do we use our power to act? How do we use our power to change things on our own terms? How do we engage in politics? So as we've done our work, we've learned more from people than we've taught, right? And the big thing that we learned probably towards the middle of last year, 6 months into our work, was that we need to expand what politics means in this country. And so we talk about new politics, and we say there's 3 categories of new politics. The first is direct action, right? When we think about political direct action from communities, we're usually thinking about protest.
True.
And so we want to expand the menu of what direct action looks like. So if I want to do something and change something in my community, the only thing on the menu is not just, I must do a protest. There must be other things that you can do. So how do you get involved in accountability? How do you get involved in making sure that you know what the regulations are, you know what the laws are?
Yes.
How do you get involved in public participation processes? How do you write to members of parliament and put pressure on them to vote in particular ways? How do you get involved in what they call the IDP, the Integrated Development Plan, which is the plan for every municipality, right? That thing must be consulted on, and the budget comes from the IDP. So you should actually be able to tell your local government exactly what the plan should be and what you want in it, so that they go and do a budget according to that.
Yes,
So we must think about as many different ways as we can
Yes.
to get involved, right? But even more, like less government things, something like SGBs, for example. SGBs actually have statutory power in law. If you're on a student governing body of a school,
Yes.
that's actually a governance role. There's actually provisions in the law for the power of an SGB. So why are we not getting involved more in that? Like, if you think about like white schools, when you hear these race issues come up, it's the chairperson of the SGB that's calling the meetings, because they actually have statutory power. And white people know that, so they use it, right? How do we start using that kind of civic power and the way we organize ourselves in society as ways to use our power to act? So that's the direct action part. The second one is something we call civics. And civics is really just how do we learn about our processes and our systems, and how do we have conversations about how politics works and what those systems are and how those systems are going to operate. So during apartheid, there was something called the UDF, the United Democratic Front. The United Democratic Front wasn't a political party. It wasn't started by a political party. It wasn't started by the ANC. It was actually during the time that political parties were banned, right? So the ANC, the PAC, the IFP, all of those were banned organizations. And so the UDF was actually civil society organizations and community street committees. And it's one of my favorite ideas, the idea of a street committee, where everybody in the street comes together and they actually sit as a committee. And people have different roles in their street. You are in charge of security. You are in charge of knowing what's happening in terms of people's economic situation. Imagine that kind of situation being what led to the 80s uprise, where people were actually organizing themselves at the level of their street.
Yes.
And they were looking after each other and looking out for each other, and then deciding, okay, guys, we're actually going to have to, if we're going to overthrow apartheid, we're going to have to do it together. That's how the UDF came together.
Yes.
But a big part of that, if you speak to any of the UDF activists, is what they called civics, is actually having kind of political education talks within their communities. And I think that's missing for us. And when we talk a bit about elections later, it's one of the things I think we have a really good opportunity. Because it's not just about somebody coming to come teach you, like the IEC must teach you the process of voting, whatever. It's also about us just talking about the things we do know or we don't know or we want to know. And that in itself is, I think, an important thing. And then the final thing is electoral politics, which we're going to talk a lot about.
Yes.
But I think we need to reclaim electoral politics. And I think we need to change the way electoral politics works in the country. I think we've kind of given way too much power to political parties and politicians. And we need to take that power back. So we've started to understand that what people want in South Africa, it's, people say we're politically apathetic and nobody cares. That's untrue.
Yep.
People care. People actually care about this country. And they care about ideas, and they care about ideology, and they care about all sorts of things. We just don't have the space to actually, on our own terms, talk about these things. And I think that's been the way we've done our work.
And one of the things when you say we've given it so much political, we've given too much power to political organizations, I think I speak for myself and maybe a lot of other people, where when you enter these spaces, you're scared you don't have the right, what is this?
Lingo, jargon.
Lingo.
Yeah.
You're scared you don't have the right, accent.
Yes.
They are
Yeah.
intimidating spaces.
Yes,
Where I'm not going to
Yes.
say chair when I address my mom.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and they're almost to a certain extent, I want to say inaccessible.
Yeah.
I want to say it inaccessible. Yeah.
To so many people.
Yes,
Yeah, to
yes.
so many people.
So you're absolutely right about the fact that we've given too much power to political organizations. But then what would be the alternative? Let's say, Tessa, I'm giving you this country, or the Rivonia Circle, I'm giving you this country, let's change the electoral system, or let's change certain things about it. What would be ideal? What do you think?
So before we get to changing the electoral system, which I think is a big part of the story,
Okay.
it's changing what we call political culture. So like just the things that were mentioned now about how you imagine what a political party is. I have no idea why we've gotten stuck on one version of what a political party is. But even, so maybe let me even go a step lower than that in the progression. Democracy at its base is just self-governance. That's all it is. People governing themselves is democracy. The fact that we then, when we say democracy, think it must mean voting, and it must mean having a certain kind of government, and it must, that's all inventions. All of that is actually something you can change and still
Every
have a
time I
democracy.
thought democracy means voting.
No, democracy
This is
literally means, demo means people, cracy means govern. People govern. That's it. That's all it means. And so, do we have the courage? And I really say it's courage because something about oppression is that it takes away our ability to imagine, right? And do we have the courage to imagine a democracy that doesn't have all of the things in it that we've been told democracy is? Could we self-govern in completely different ways? So instead of like, we must, protect democracy, I'm like, we must innovate democracy. We talk about entrepreneurship and innovation about everything else.
Yes.
Why can't we innovate politics? Why can't we innovate democracy? Why can't we have incubators that start to rethink what could self-governance look like if it wasn't this
Yes.
other thing?
Yes.
This thing we've been told it is, right? Why is voting the best way to choose a government? Is there another way to choose a government? Could we explore that and still have a democratic outcome where people are governing themselves, but it's not necessarily to the things we have now?
Yes. Yes.
For me, unless we start
So
having
interesting,
that,
actually. It's so interesting.
Because
what you
it's
say.
all a concept.
Yes, and also the part where you hardly hear of innovation. Like, we just know that this has been
Democracy,
done the way it's been
voting.
done, and this is how it is, and
And that's why when we think about the fact that, okay, this country is going the bad way, we think about, I need to change my vote.
Yes.
Because
yes.
we think that's the only place where your power lies.
Yeah. And so I think that there's a big task ahead of us in that kind of work, reimagining what democracy could look like in politics. So when we think here about what a political party is, we think about branches, we think about regional chairs, we think about elective conferences, we think about regalia, we think about all sorts of, we think about, the lingo and all of that. In the US, for example, when people talk about the Democratic Party, it doesn't have membership. It has registered Democrats or registered Republicans, which means anyone can register as a Democrat, and that's about your registration point when you're going to go and vote, right?
Yes.
So being a party member is actually a very weird concept. So if you want to be a party member, you're probably going to be a party member because you want to be part of the management team or the executive team. That's it. There's not this, we're going to count how many members we have. That doesn't exist there because the way they structure political parties is different from the way we structure political parties. You go to European countries, they structure political parties differently. You can construct a political party any way you want. We've chosen the model that we have because that's the one that the ANC chose in 1991 when they reconstituted themselves. So now it's like, if you don't have branches, you're not a properly political organization. Who said the branch is the best way to organize?
Yes.
Are there other ways that we could do that? So I think that we've got some work to do in that kind of space, right? What is the modern political party for South Africa? What is the modern political form of organizing? So, so in a few weeks' time, I'm going to start hosting a thing. It's called Voters Caucus, the Voters Caucus. And all I don't know if you guys remember something called the Weekend Social. There was like a few years ago, there were a group of girls in the north of Joburg. They were doing something called the Weekend Social, which was just this nice, like Sunday afternoon, chilled vibes, everybody looking cute, But it became kind of, a cultural experience that everybody showed up to.
Okay.
I'm like, why don't we have that for politics? Why can't we connect around like music and fun and entertainment and have games nights and have other ways of gathering each other that is not a rally?
Yes.
Like, what would that look like? Who would it draw in? Who would it make comfortable?
Yes.
I'm just like, there's opportunities there, right? So that would be my first thing. We need to reinvent and reimagine and innovate democracy, and particularly how we organize for politics. The second part is completely ridding ourselves of the idea that the next Mandela is going to be born, or that we're waiting for the next Mandela to show up.
One of them.
Guys, no one is coming to save us. Right? This big man politics, trying to find this one messianic figure. That now we're comparing Musi to Herman to Gayton. Oh my gosh. It's like,
because it's on everybody's mind, like, who's gonna save us?
You're so right. We're Chris Hani of our generation. Yeah.
And it's one of the things that we don't talk about enough about the liberation struggle. The liberation struggle wasn't a one-man show until the very end, right? And even the decision of Mandela becoming the face of the thing wasn't his decision.
Yes.
Wasn't because he was some sort of extraordinary figure. It was a decision of a collective that wasn't even with him at the time. Right? Tambo made the decision, sitting somewhere in exile.
Yes.
Let's use Nelson Mandela as the prisoner that we're going to focus on. That's how Mandela became Mandela.
Yes, yes.
There's no special reason. It took hundreds of leaders to get liberation. Why would it not take hundreds of leaders and thousands of leaders to get us progress? So this fixation on one person has become dangerous for us. It's become dangerous.
Yeah, because what we do is now we exclude ourselves from the issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like, well, there's
Absolutely.
a Mandela out there. It's not Ursula, yeah.
I mean, we're a country of what I call leadership lists. So every year there's the top 40 Forbes, the top 200 youth. We can come up with leadership lists for everything except politics. Politics, we're waiting for a messiah. What are we doing?
Tessa's dropping so many bombs.
Like, what are we doing?
And she's calling a lot of us out.
It's weird, guys. It's weird. It's weird to think that 60 million people can be saved by, the charisma, not even the prowess. I was about to say like the intellectual prowess. It's actually not even that. We're waiting for like the most charismatic person in the room. And that's also part of the reason why people stay out of politics.
True.
Is because the picture we have in our mind of who that person is going to be is never us.
Yes.
Yes,
It can never be like somebody like me can walk into that office and can change things. And for that reason, we will always be led by people we don't respect because we don't respect ourselves.
Sure.
We don't respect ourselves to lead. We don't respect ourselves to be the ones that can do things in this country. And so the people who are willing to take the chance to respect themselves, even if we don't respect them, they'll be the one that lead us. And it's not because they're better. It's because they're more courageous. So, yeah, that is one of the hills on which I'm willing to die. Messianic politics must absolutely go away. But the third one is the issue of voting, right? And the electoral system.
That's actually, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Like, we just got so lost into, like...
Let's get into the weeds of that one, right?
Yes, let's look at Election 101. How does, elections work in our country? Yeah, let's start there.
When I thought about this topic, I'm like you said when we opened, we know I must vote. And we know, okay, I'll one day get a ballot that has... two or what, but I just vote. I don't have the 101.
Yes.
And I know there's someone who's watching this. So to someone else it may seem what is this, trivial. Borobonga, you can go find a book or whatever, but we want this to be accessible.
Yes.
So what is voting? How does it work? I
Yes.
work, there's local, there was actually one interview of yours that I watched, and I learned that way. I can't remember what it was, but I didn't know that was involved with voting, or I have a say in. I don't remember what it was, but yeah, I just learned something new that I didn't know. When I vote, I can. Oh, you were talking about the electoral bill.
Yeah.
And the changes in the electoral bill, but I can't remember specific. But I didn't know I have an impact on that.
Sure.
So let's
Okay.
do elections 101.
Yeah,
Currently.
I can also speak to. I think it was. I was 20 when I learned that there's a municipal election. For me, election time is election
just go
time.
vote.
Yes,
Yeah.
you know. So all of that, like these are things that we take for granted, but people don't know.
Absolutely. So in fact, we have 3 elections, not 2.
Oh,
You
Right.
see?
So local, national, and provincial elections are considered 3 different elections. The local, the national and provincial just happen on the same day, but they're not the same election.
Okay.
You're voting for 2 different governments on that day. You're voting for your government at provincial level, which results in what you call a legislature of, depending on different places, of a few hundred people at a maximum. In fact, in Kimberley, or in not Kimberley, the entire province is called Northern Cape. The Northern Cape, they only actually have 5 people who sit
On the legislature.
at the legislature level. I was like, that's wild. There's 5 seats. That's wild. But it can be any amount depending on the population size.
Okay.
But you have MPLs and you have a premier that's elected differently from national, right? So national, you're voting for parties who are going to be putting in people as MPs.
Okay.
Now, up until this point, local government elections has been the only place where we've been able to vote for individuals. And that's also something we didn't know we were doing, most of us.
Yeah.
So at a local government level, when you're going to go and vote, you're voting for somebody to represent you in the city council. And the city council is the one that decides on all of the budgets and programs to get you your basic services. So the national government does not decide on whether you're going to get water or not. That's not where that budget is passed.
Yes.
The budget for your water is actually passed at the council, right? So it's that kind of basic granular stuff.
Yes.
I actually always think that what we've missed out on in this country is I would want my best politicians and my best bureaucrats to be at my council level, not to be at my national level.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because their decisions and their ability to govern is going to have the most practical impact on my life.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm just like, why are we focusing on a president when I want to make sure that the mayor that's going to sign off my budget,
Yes.
especially in Johannesburg in the last few months,
Yo,
that's a crisis, guys.
it is.
Because it might mean that we get a budget that is terrible, or the budget doesn't get passed at all for our most basic services and needs.
Okay.
But at local government level, you have 2 ballots. One ballot is what you call a PR ballot, or proportional representation ballot, which is only for political parties. And political parties there submit a list, and they say whatever proportion of the vote they get. Let's say they get 10% of the vote. They get 10% of the seats that are for political parties. If you get 50% of the vote, you get 50% of the seats that are for political parties. But at local government level, you also have a ward councillor. So you have a ward ballot, and that's individuals. It's not
Yes.
parties.
Yes.
So I might be an individual from a party that's on that list, but I'm actually contesting as an individual.
Yes. Yes.
So that's why independent candidates could run there without there being an issue. We've never had to think about, independent candidates at local level, because you can be an independent candidate because that's a list of individuals, right?
Some could be associated with a party,
absolutely.
but it's individuals.
And that's also why you have so many by-elections. Because if the individual decides, actually, guys, I no longer want to be a councillor, or if a community decides, we don't want this councillor,
Yes.
and they make enough noise and put enough pressure that this person then says, okay, then I won't be a councillor. Or a political party that person's in expels them. And they're like, well, then if I'm expelled from the party, I don't want to be a councillor. That seat becomes vacant. So the party can't just replace the person.
It has to be the people.
Yes. So if you remember, like 2 weeks ago, Jimmy Mangi was, Mzwanele Mangi, sorry, was made a member of parliament by the EFF. No one needed to go back to a vote for that. Because at national provincial level, you don't have that kind of individual list, individual ballot where somebody can stand as an individual. You're always having the PR list.
Okay.
Because the reason why we don't know who our members of parliament are is because they represent parties. They don't represent us.
So they don't stand as individuals.
They don't stand as individuals. They're not representing their communities. So in fact, your ward councillor, and everybody's got a ward councillor, that person doesn't represent their party. They represent the ward. And once we realize that power, if we as wards got together and said, actually guys, we don't want this person anymore, let's make their lives difficult. Let's get them out. We could actually do it and trigger a by-election, and those of us who got together can say, actually, we want you to stand, whether you have a party or not. And you can become the ward councillor. It's as simple as
But what's the power of a ward councillor? Because I know the ward councillor was voting and she lives in this complex. And like, I keep only like, what's the power that she has? Yeah.
So the ward councillor votes. That's their most important power. They vote on your behalf, right? So if ward councillors, they can advocate on your behalf for the issues. And so they can make sure that the right issues get into like the integrated development plan, that gets into the programs of government, that gets the budgets approved. The ward councillor the ward councillor is basically your advocate in that room. It's the person who can speak on your behalf in council. In Khayelitsha in 2021, one of the wards there decided that a community member was going to be their ward councillor, and so they rallied around him and got him elected. They send a delegation with him to every council meeting, so you can't lie to them ever. They go, and listen, you can go. You can attend any council meeting in this country. You can attend any sitting of provincial legislature or any sitting of parliament. You can attend. There's a public gallery. You can just go. No one can tell you not. It's your house. It's the people's house. It's not their house. And so they just go. And they make sure that he can never lie to them about what's happening there. If they send him with a mandate, he must come back with the answers that they want.
For the specific ward.
Yes.
Yes.
And so that's the power of direct representation, right? Where you don't have to go knock on the party's door. And at national and provincial level, part of the power that we've given in having a just proportional representation, only parties, is we've given all of the power to the party bosses. So we must also remember, we don't vote for presidents at all.
Yes.
You as a voter have never voted for a president in your life.
That's actually so true, because the party decides for you.
Yes.
So the parties put together lists as well at national provincial level. We also have what they call a closed system list process, where the party does not have to get any input from anyone else except in the party to put together the list. Whoever gets into parliament must be on a party list. If you as the public don't have any input into who's on the party list, you have no input into who's going into parliament, even though you're voting for parliament. We've given the power all to the parties at those levels. The party can decide on this is the list before the election. After the election, they can change the list. They can just change all the members on that list.
Yes, yes.
2 days afterwards. It's the most ridiculous thing ever, but we've given all of this power to parties. And then they put in the MPs, right? Based again on proportional representation. However many, so the ANC got 57% in the last election, so they have 57% of the seats in parliament.
Yes, yes.
And that's the reason why they can confidently say that their president will be the president, because parliament then sits right after the election. Those 400 people, they then vote on a president amongst themselves. So somebody in that room can become president. Now, effectively what that means, and this is going to become really important if we have a coalition or if we have somebody or a party that doesn't get a major majority, right? But even without that dynamic at play, if you go in and you're a parliamentarian on that day, and you can lobby parties to vote for you to be president, even if you're from the KISS party, you can become president. Nothing stops that. Those 400 people are acting on their own mandate once they get in there. They could make anybody in the room president. They don't have to make
Yes,
Ramaphosa, or they can make anyone president.
I didn't know that.
That's how much power they
So
have.
the reason we have an ANC aligned president is usually because the ANC got the majority of the seats.
Absolutely. And that's why you end up with an ANC president. But if the ANC decided, like they've done in the city of Joburg, for example, the ANC EFF coalition, they've had the majority of the seats in the city of Joburg between those two, right? But the mayor has ended up being from the Al Jamaa party because they can make that decision. They have the right to make that decision. They can use all of the seats that they have and all of the votes that they have to decide some random person you've never heard of before because they got a seat in council is the mayor. The same is true for parliament. So the idea that we voting for a president is nonsense. We don't ever vote for a president.
Sure.
And that's also why political parties can recall a president at any time. Remember, so Mbeki's been recalled, Zuma's been recalled. No one came to come consult us. It's not our business. We don't vote for presidents. They do. And so they have the power to do whatever they want. And that's because of the electoral system. So can we change that? Absolutely. Because we can change it in terms of legislation even without changing the constitution. And we can change the constitution if we wanted to vote differently in terms of directly voting for a president, right? But I'll give you two examples, the UK and the US. In the US, number one, you vote directly for your member of parliament. There it's Congress, right? Different houses of Congress. So your congressman, number one, must live in your community. They must live in the area of the people who voted for them.
Sure.
You must know who that person is. You must know what it is they're doing. And there's actually times in the year that they are mandated to come and hold public town halls and community meetings with you to come and give an account of their work. In fact, I was in the US a few months ago. That's where I got this Black Voters Matter t-shirt. So I was in Atlanta and the state Congress was having a vote on LGBTIQ issues. I've never seen it in my life, but I was meeting with NGOs. All of these NGOs were like, sorry, we can't meet with you anymore today. Our state capital has decided they're doing a vote and we're going to go and lobby them. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, we're going to go and talk to all of those representatives because we are the ones that voted for them. So we must go and make sure the people we voted for are going to vote the way that we would vote. So they literally went to the place themselves and went to go speak to those people directly. I thought that was the weirdest thing, but it makes sense because those people actually come from their communities, from their areas. They know who they are.
They know
it goes back to being like fully invested.
Exactly.
Fully invested and understanding politics are personal. It goes back to, the concept is that
and the
don't
fact that they're
detach yourself.
accessible. Should we go to parliament or outside the security? There's this, there's that. It's inaccessible.
Exactly.
It's not people you have access to.
Yes.
And the people
Absolutely.
that have access to them are of a particular class or particular
There we
association,
go.
particular party.
So, firstly, Tessa, there's so many questions. Firstly, you're saying that we only really have access and power at a community level, local elections. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, right now.
Okay.
That can change, but that requires us to have electoral reform. And there's an electoral reform on the table at the moment, right? But that's to include independent candidates at the national and provincial level, which we haven't had before. So in the next election, we're not going to have 2 ballots, we're going to have 3. We're going to have 2 national ballots, essentially. Actually, we might have 4. But we're going to have 2 national ballots, essentially, and then 1 provincial ballot. But independent candidates will be on a ballot, this 3rd ballot, but they'll be on a ballot with political parties, which is going to make it a little bit more complicated than it is at the ward level. But essentially, you'll be able to vote directly for individuals as well. What they've done by putting them on the same ballot as political parties is that they've avoided the direct accountability that you have at a ward level. They don't want that direct accountability. They want as few independent candidates as possible, but they do not want their party representatives to be able to stand as independents or as individuals. Does that make sense?
Yes.
They're saying, like, if you do it like you do at ward level, then our ANC MP will actually be on that ballot as themselves. Yes. And that gives them way too much power.
Yes.
So that's why they've gone the route that they've gone, and there are some constitutional questions about it. But the point is that we need to change the system almost in its entirety. We need to get to a point where we are represented by the people in parliament, and they don't represent their parties only. We must get to some version of that. Until that's the case, they'll continue to just have vote after vote. They'll vote on budgets, they'll vote on pala, they'll vote on whatever. And we will have no say. They won't listen to us, they won't take us seriously. Unlike in the UK last year. So the UK, in the matter of 3 months, had 4 prime ministers. Boris Johnson, what was the lady's name? Liz, what? They had, they had a wide range of different prime ministers, which is the equivalent of our president. The reason why that happened was people from those people's own parties, the Conservative Party, the MPs from their own parties, were being put under pressure by their communities to say, if you continue to support that prime minister, we will recall you now. That was the pressure. They were like, we don't like this person. This person is not acting in our interest. Yes, it's nice that it's your comrade, it's nice that it's your friend, but that person must go. And if you don't have them go, the law says that they have what they call a recall clause. So they can recall you immediately. And that's why they acted the way that they did.
They're accountable directly to them.
Exactly. And we don't have that kind of system yet. But we must start asking for it. And there are small ways we can start thinking about that in 2024 already, right?
Okay.
So for me, I've got a big call of action around 2024 for what we should be doing as voters. I'm calling it the voters' election, right? As voters, we must take control of 2024, which is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation now, a year before the election. Because we usually only start talking about elections like a month or 2 or 3 before. So the first call of action is around what standard we're setting for political parties, right? Both in terms of the issues and in terms of who ends up on their lists. Before we get to next year and they have their manifestos, we must, as communities of people, start saying, what are the issues that we care about? What are the solutions that we want to see? Not wait for them to tell us employment is important.
Yes.
We must decide, is employment the important thing for us, right? We must treat this election like we are bosses hiring our new employees. We are firing employees and we are hiring employees. When you're going to hire new employees, what you do is you put together the terms of reference. Yes. What's on our terms of reference as the voters going into this election? What are the issues that we want to see on their manifestos? What are the kind of solutions that we want to hear about? What are the kinds of things that we want them to commit to? Not promise, commit to. How are we going to hold them accountable? All of that must be on our agenda going into the election. And that requires us to have conversations amongst ourselves as voters first.
Yes.
Right? So that when they come to us and they say, oh, we are interested in renewable energy, we say, yeah, boss, nice. We're very happy for you. But actually, what we want is we want a crime and safety plan because our children are suffering under drugs. We don't. If that's not on your agenda, you're not going to get my vote. It's as simple as that, right? I set the agenda. I decide what's important for the election, not you. You're the person who's coming for the interview.
That's true.
As the politician, you're coming for an interview. You don't get to come and show me, this is what should be important for your company. No. It's my company.
Yes.
It's my government. It's my thing. You are just going to be an employee. And so I think we must treat this election that way, right? The second thing is we must know who are on those lists. We must know the name of every person who's on every political party's list that wants to get access. We must know who they are. We must know what their credentials are. We must know why they're there. We must know who they represent. And they must tell us how they're going to vote on issues. They must tell us what it is their priorities are. They can't just send randos, guys. We must actually start looking at the quality of those people. If we're willing to sit and read through the bios of 200 young people in the Mail and Guardian every year, surely we can read through the bios of 200 people who are on the ANC's list or the DA's list and compare which list has got the stronger quality people on it.
This is actually but I guess you're answering the question, because my question was, how do you, and I know it's a silly question, maybe not, but we all sit and we're like, who do you vote for? I don't see where I would want my vote to go.
Yeah.
You know, and so I guess it goes back to that. Are you taking
What do
the
you
time?
want? And also, what do you want?
Yes. Are you taking the time to read and find out what exactly is this person offering?
Exactly.
Who's on the list? What am I voting for?
Yep.
You know, because I feel like in SA it boils down to radical, team black, or team white. You know, that would be the top
Yeah, yeah.
three. That's what that's what it boils down to.
And guys, we also have options, nah? We're not at a dearth of options. In the 2021 elections, 325 parties participated. 325 participated. We don't only have 3 options.
Yes, it feels like we only have, because
Right?
it makes it like the whole idea is then your vote has gone to waste.
No.
If you vote for the smaller
Number
parties.
one,
That's
there
a good one, yeah.
There are 14 parties in parliament. There are 14 parties in parliament. All of them have voting rights. All of them represent somebody. Why don't they represent you? Right? There are 400 people there. They can represent us. But more importantly, this idea that your vote goes to waste is absolute nonsense, right? And this is going to be where I'll end off. This idea that, you know, the best way to, if you're upset or you're disillusioned, is just to stay away, because then, number one, you know, you're not just voting into the ether, but number two, you're not contributing to the mess. Politicians would like nothing more, especially politicians in big parties, than for people to stay away. It helps them with numbers, because voting is a numbers game, right? So there are about 40 million people who are 18 years old and above in the country, which means they could vote if they wanted to. In 2021, only 26 million people were registered, which means they could show up. But only 12 million people actually voted.
It's ridiculous, yeah.
So less than a third of
Yes,
people
the
who
numbers.
could have voted
Yes.
decided on our local government in its entirety. So when the ANC gets 50% or 57%, they're not getting 57% of the entire voting population.
Yes.
It's only of the people who show up. So if only 5 people show up, by law, there's nothing wrong with calling that a legal
Yes,
election.
yes.
And they would love it. Why? Because then they only have 5 people to convince.
Yes, yes.
And if those 5 people all vote for one party, that party gets 100% of the vote.
Can I also touch on something we spoke of air? Like how you mentioned the demographic representation within the 12 million people that voted. Like if you look at the numbers, the racial demographics, it doesn't represent the racial demographics of the. Because I was saying Black Voters Matter doesn't really count in SA because we are, and you were like, no, it definitely counts.
Absolutely
when you consider
counts.
that the Black voters aren't voting.
It absolutely
Yes.
counts, right? White people outvote us by ratio. So if you see like the number of white people, it will be 80% of white people that vote, but 40% of Black people who are voting. Can you see, like, so even we might still have the more of the numbers,
Yes.
just, you know,
Yes, because
of
it
the
was
demographics.
so large. Yeah.
But in terms of who's showing up for their interest, why do you think the DA or the FF Plus can get seats, guys? The FF Plus can get seats because they're treating voting like a group project. And their group is white Afrikaner people. And all they need to do, because a seat in parliament is 50,000 votes. If they want 2 or 3 seats, all they need to make sure is that 100,000 of their group show up.
Yes.
Then they've got 2 seats. It's not difficult. It's math. It's literally math. We, as Black people, can fill up stadiums of 2 or 3 seats. Come on, we fill F&B for soccer. That's 2 seats in parliament. Basically, if Orlando Pirates and Kaizer Chiefs decided to start a party, they could at least get 2 seats in parliament.
At the very least.
Just by hosting a derby and having people vote there. What I'm
Yes.
saying is we're not showing up, right? And the more of us show up, the harder the politicians have to work. Right now, they have to work less hard because there's fewer people to convince. The more of us show up, the more they have to work for the votes. So if 40 million of us show up, the ANC only got 16 million votes in the last national election, and they only got 10 million votes in the last local election. If 28 million people who either registered and didn't show up or didn't register at all just showed up and didn't vote ANC, the ANC is in trouble. The ANC loses. Even if they voted for random parties. Because by ratio, the ANC would not have 50% of the vote.
How trustworthy is our IEC?
So our process is extremely trustworthy. People have been complaining about it's not digital enough. Part of the reason why it's not digital is because it being manual
Yes.
makes it more trustworthy.
Yes,
Because
yes.
once you add in digital components, hacking and all of those things
Yes,
come
yes.
in, that's number one. Number two is we actually have had quite rigorous systems, right? And rigorous processes. We don't always, so we have electoral courts as well during that period. We don't always use them as well for like the incidents where there are complaints and stuff like that
Yes.
about ballots, and I think that that could be strengthened. But on the whole, in terms of running a voting process, the IEC has done really, really well in running a credible voting process. Where they haven't done as well is things like voter education,
Yes.
is things like, getting people, animated about the vote and all of that. But the credibility of the system thus far has not been challenged.
Okay.
And so I don't think we should be worried that somebody is going to try and steal our vote
Okay.
through the IEC. That's not a worry I have had so far.
I've also
Yeah.
always just wondered. Okay, so we definitely do need to wrap things up. If you've got any parting words, I know you've shared so much. Like I learned so much today
Yes.
about our own system, and I hope every listener at home is just like really invested and share this episode. I know it's a tricky one to go through, but share it and let us like really try to be invested in how things work in our country, and so that we better understand what is it I'm doing when I say I'm registering to go vote, and not just be very aloof. And like you're saying, and people say it over and over, but we forget how personal this thing is. It boils down to, am I getting electricity? Am I getting water? Am I getting service delivery?
Is my child safe every day?
Oh,
Is my
it
child
boils down
safe?
to that. What we're talking about is that discussion.
Yeah, that's
it's
exactly
it's
what
much
it is.
easier to have a discussion on rehabilitation of addicts and whatever than to us really talk about what is our governing system doing to try to help us
Yeah.
achieve those things and those goals. So, if you've got any parting words for the layman listening, walking into elections for 2024, how can they better prepare themselves? Where do they start? Where do they get the information? How do they find out about the 200 candidates that are going to be on the list? You spoke about reading through these bios. Where do they get that? Like, just last few 10 minutes, 5 minutes of your
Sure.
time.
So just in terms of those practical things, every party that participates at either provincial or national level has to at some point submit that list to the IEC, and the IEC has to make it public. I think it's like 2 or 3 months before the election.
Okay.
So look out for that. Usually parties don't put out their bios. And one of the demands we must make as the public is that if you are a party that is serious about my vote, give me the bios. It's very simple. Just give me, if you don't give me the bios, you're not one of the people I'm going to vote
How
for.
can I vote for you?
Yeah.
You didn't even put down a CV.
Yeah,
how
yeah,
am I getting? How are you getting the job?
Secondly, make your manifesto accessible. The EFF had a 200-page manifesto in 2021. No one was going to read it. No one was going to read it. So we must demand that for accessible manifestos in different languages. We must put these people under pressure. They want to vote to govern a country.
I love
They
what
must
you're
work for
saying.
it. They must absolutely work for it.
I tried to be a better voter and go through manifestos the last election.
But they're
But
overwhelming.
they're overwhelming. So I love what you're saying, because you
The
almost
onus
blame
is on
yourself.
them.
Yeah, you blame yourself for me. I
Yes.
can't read this
When the
thing.
onus is on them.
So say to them, I will give my vote to the person who comes up with a
Yes.
manifesto in the language that I can understand.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Where's that person? Oh, it's you. Great. We're going to work with you because then we can hold you accountable afterwards, right? So those processes do exist, and we need to do that kind of work. The other parting shots I have are, one, treat the election like a group assignment. Let's stop being like coy about my vote is my secret. A friend of mine last week said, this my vote is my secret stuff and we don't talk about our vote. Is the same thing we do in our jobs where we don't talk about our salary. But the reason why is because our boss doesn't want us to talk about our salary, because he doesn't want us to realize that that person is getting more money than you for the same job. It's the same principle.
Yes.
They benefit of us not talking about our vote to each other. So let's start talking to each other about our vote, challenging each other on why we're voting the way we're voting. Let's host little gatherings instead of playing 30 seconds. Let's say, who's your vote?
Yes.
Who's your fighter? What's going on here?
Yes.
Right? Let's start having those conversations and show up in numbers together for ourselves. Right?
Yeah.
Let's not show up for the party.
Group assignment.
Group assignment. Group assignment. One vote is as powerful. 100 votes is more powerful. 1,000 votes is more powerful. So let's figure out who we're voting with. Political parties have outwitted us because they always vote as a group assignment. Right? The ANC's got 600 members. They know at least their 600 members are going to show up. Us, we're just, I'm voting by myself. It's not an individual exercise, guys.
And you know what I like about this conversation? Tessa is taking us to the seriousness of this action. I mean, we've always thought because we related to our freedom, right? We know the seriousness, but it's actually even more serious now.
Yes. Like, boils down to over and over, we can say this 10 times this episode, it's personal.
Yep.
It's
it is
personal.
absolutely personal. And so part of the group assignment type stuff is not only talking about our vote, but talking about it in ways where we actually hold each other accountable as voters, right? And we don't let people sit it out. How the country is governed, no matter who governs it and who voted for them, that person is still your government.
Yes.
And they're still presiding over your money because it's our money sitting there that they're about to take hold of. And that's the third thing. Voting is the process of hiring and firing people to go and sit in your house and manage your finances. You would never take that lightly. You cannot take it lightly.
Sure.
We are hiring and firing people to go and live in our house and use our money. We must not take it lightly at all. If there's anything we must do for ourselves, is make sure we do that. And then the last thing I would say is who's on the ballot matters less than what's on the ballot.
Okay.
The issues that we care about must matter more than who can do the best dance or who can give the best spectacle and who can come up with the cutest t-shirt. We must care about the issues before we care about the people.
Yes.
Who's on the ballot is nice. What is on the ballot for us? What are the things that must be solved by the next administration, and how are we going to make sure it gets solved? Because that also gives us a job for after the election. So we're not tracking individuals after the election.
Yes.
We're tracking issues. We're tracking whether the things that we care about and we said they must go and do, they've done it. And if they don't do it, we must ask how are we going to fire them.
Sure. Tessa, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was today's episode of The Conversation Capital. Make sure you share this one. I think more than anything, we're realizing how important it is. It is a year before elections. Let's be as responsible as possible to learn the manifestos, learn the different bios that you said that get put out. And I'm actually going to be holding myself and the people around me accountable just to learn more about who it is we're voting for and how to, actively participate in democracy. Thank you so much, Tessa.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was today's episode of The Conversation Capital. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For now, though, goodbye. God bless.